Today, you're going to hear a true story, so absurd, it feels like fiction. But don't worry, because here, the strange helps you fall asleep. Close your eyes. Let the day begin to dissolve into silence. Take a deep breath. Feel the weight of the world slipping from your shoulders. Now, imagine living in a place where titles hold more power than truth, where a name, a signature, or even a paper crown can change the way people see you. In the waking world, we're taught to recognize authority through symbols, a uniform, a badge, a throne. But what if those symbols are created out of sheer will? When there's no castle, no army, no subjects, yet still a queen. This is the story of Anna Leontina, a woman who, with no land, no soldiers, and no recognition from any nation, proclaimed herself the Queen of Araucanía and Patagonia. A monarch without a throne, a sovereign of an invisible kingdom that nonetheless captivated intellectuals, intrigued the press, and gave rise to a symbolic universe where fantasy ruled supreme. But this story doesn't begin with Anna. Before her, there was another, a Frenchman with a theatrical name and even more theatrical ambitions. He, too, declared himself king of these mysterious southern lands of South America. A real place, yes, inhabited by indigenous peoples, vast landscapes, often overlooked by history. But the kingdom, it was as fragile as a house of cards. Tonight, we invite you to walk gently along the thin line between dream and illusion. This is the story of a woman who used the power of titles to shape her own reality, and in doing so, left behind a question that still lingers in silence. Why did so many want to believe her? Maybe because deep down, we all carry within us a small invisible throne, a place where we long to be seen, to be acknowledged, perhaps even loved, where our fantasies are allowed to breathe. In this episode, we'll travel through real documents, interviews lost to time, stamps, crests, and handwritten letters, always signed by Her Majesty Leontina I. We'll explore the details of this quiet theater that became, for some, a refuge from the ordinary. But first, imagine a crown not made of gold, but of words. A scepter raised not by power, but by imagination. A cloak unseen, woven from the longing to belong to something greater than oneself. This is not just a story about false titles. It's about the power of belief. How the symbolic, even when lacking substance, can still be full of meaning. And when it ends, you might find yourself wondering, what feels more real? A kingdom with no soil but filled with ritual? Or a solid world where no one dares to dream? So now, close your eyes and get ready to meet the queen who never existed. If you enjoy stories that challenge logic, stories that drift between the absurd and the possible, take a moment to like this video, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to the channel. Not to serve a throne, but to keep wandering with us through the spaces where reality and dream begin to blur. Because here, even what never existed can still make sense. Imagine now a woman, Brazilian, discreet, yet wrapped in an air of nobility no one quite knew where it came from. She didn't wear shining crowns, nor did she walk among marble columns. She gave no orders to knights, nor heard bells ringing in her name. But still, she was called a queen. Her name, Anna Leontina, and her reign was not over lands, but over the imagination of those who crossed her path. Anna styled herself as the Queen of Araucanía and Patagonia, two names that echoed with beauty and mystery, as if belonging to a distant tale. But what she truly ruled was a symbolic throne, inherited from an empire that never appeared on official maps. An invisible throne, held only by words, rituals, and an aura carefully built. There was no palace, but there was prestige. A peculiar kind of prestige, it's true, one that springs when someone refuses to live an ordinary life. Anna walked the streets like any other woman, but carried within her the enchanted weight of a title she had claimed herself. They say her presence was serene, yet firm, that she spoke with elegance, that she signed formal letters as Her Majesty Leontina I, and that, with this simple gesture, she unsettled even the most skeptical. After all, who would dare contradict someone who truly believed she was a queen? And more than believing, Anna acted like one. She created symbols, commissioned coats of arms, wrote documents. Her gestures were not merely performative, but filled with an unusual kind of faith. Faith in fiction as a legitimate realm. And that confused. It enchanted. It awakened the curiosity of those willing to look beyond the obvious. Some laughed at her, but others were enchanted. Poets, writers, the curious, all sorts of silent visitors orbited her private world. And somehow, Leontina welcomed them with the solemnity of a hostess who reigned, yes, but in a country that could only be visited with closed eyes. The strangest thing was that, despite living on the margins of official circles, her figure attracted discreet yet constant attention. It was as if her imaginary royalty filled a gap in an increasingly skeptical world. A fantasy that, improbable as it was, offered solace. And that solace was precious. Anna Leontina knew that power does not reside solely in control over lands, but in control over the narrative. And that she possessed. Her story was told in letters, curious newspapers, whispered conversations among those who still knew how to dream. And so, even without a crown, even without official anthems, she reigned. In silence, in dream, in metaphor. It's not easy to say where theater ended and belief began. Perhaps she herself didn't know, but there is something deeply human in that. The desire to wear a role that offers meaning, to find a title that explains us, even if no one else recognizes it. In the real world, Anna was an ordinary Brazilian woman, but in her world, she was Majesty. And perhaps that small detail is more important than any diplomatic recognition. Who could blame her? The world has already recognized empires built on wars, lies, colonial contracts. And Anna, she simply raised her own empire on the fertile ground of imagination. After all, if there are kings who govern through fear, why couldn't there be a queen who rules through the beauty of the improbable? There is something deeply charming about a kingdom born from imagination, but also something unsettling, especially when that kingdom insists on existing even after being ignored by all maps, embassies, and treaties. Such was the kingdom of Araucanía and Patagonia, a name that sounds pulled from an adventure novel, and, in a way, it really was. But not from a book, rather from the mind of one man, Orly Antoine de Townens, an eccentric, dreamy Frenchman determined to become a king. In the year 1860, this man set off for South America and got lost among the wild landscapes of southern Chile and Argentina. It's unclear whether he was seduced by the natural beauty, the Mapuche culture, or some deeper ambition. But the fact is that Orly wrote a constitution, designed flags, and, without anyone inviting him, proclaimed the founding of the Kingdom of Araucanía and Patagonia. Self-proclaimed King Orly I, he began to behave like a true monarch, even though he ruled over no one. He created a coat of arms, tried to form a diplomatic corps, and back in France, sought recognition for his utopian project. But the world, of course, did not respond with reverence. It responded with laughter. Still, his story crossed generations like an absurd whisper, something between delirium and fable. And for a very few, like Anna Leontina, this invisible kingdom seemed more real than the countries drawn on paper. Officially, the Kingdom of Araucanía and Patagonia never existed. No nation recognized it. Not even the indigenous peoples who lived on those lands knew about a monarchy proclaimed in their name. It was like a castle floating in the air, solid only in the minds of those who believed. But there is something persistent about this kind of dream. Orly died, yes, but he did not take his kingdom with him. On the contrary, he left a symbolic, almost theatrical succession, where other men, and later Anna Leontina, claimed the continuation of his work. This cycle of successors never governed any territory, but it kept existing, creating documents, issuing seals, writing letters with royal language. A constant effort to keep alive the flame of an imaginary empire that, though ignored by all, refused to disappear. Deep down, what was born there was not a political kingdom, but a symbol, an idea that challenged the boundaries between the real and the invented, between what the world accepts as legitimate and what it chooses to ignore. And maybe that's where the true power of these stories lies. Because if so many kings throughout history have been enthroned by force, conquest, or inheritance, why not a king or queen enthroned solely by the insistence of imagination? Anna Leontina understood this like few others. She didn't need to conquer Araucanía or Patagonia. She didn't need an army. It was enough for her to continue the ritual, the gesture, the signature on behalf of a throne no one saw, but that, to her, existed fully. This is the kind of illusion that, even when disproved 1,000 times, does not vanish. Because it is not out there. It lives inside those who dream it. And perhaps, this is the kind of story that helps us sleep better. Not because it is false, but because it reveals a hidden side of reality. The human desire to belong, to imagine, to create a world of our own when the official world does not welcome us. In the silence that remains after a dream goes unfulfilled, something even more curious can sometimes be born, the continuation of the delusion. This was the case with the imaginary throne of Araucanía and Patagonia. When Orly Antoine de Townens, the first and self-proclaimed king, passed away in 1878, He didn't take with him just his ceremonial garments or official papers. He carried with him the frustration of never having been recognized. But he left behind something unexpected, a symbolic legacy. It seems strange to imagine that someone could inherit a throne that never truly existed. But it's precisely that strangeness that gives depth to this story. Because even without an army, a people, or a palace, there were those who wished to continue the reign begun by Orly. Not for glory, but perhaps for the enchantment that illusion can offer. After his death, claimants emerged. Mostly French. Middle-aged men with romantic spirits and time to spare. They called themselves princes or regents of a kingdom no one could visit. Some created official documents. Others founded associations, wrote letters to the UN, issued public proclamations in ceremonial tones. All with the care and solemnity one expects from traditional nobility, even if no one outside that circle took it seriously. It is in this strange royal theater that Anna Leontina appears. But she doesn't arrive right after Orly. Her entrance happens much later, when the symbolic throne had already passed through many hands, or rather, many hearts willing to sustain the game. One of the French successors, enthusiastic about the idea of expanding his dynasty beyond Europe, decided, no one knows exactly how, that the next monarch would be a Brazilian woman. Leontina de Jesus de Silva, or, as she liked to sign, Leontina I, Queen of Araucanía and Patagonia. Unlike Orly, who traveled to the southern regions to anchor his fantasy in some real geography, Anna never set foot in Araucanía or Patagonia. But that didn't stop her from assuming, with full grace and conviction, the symbolic throne. She inherited the symbols, the titles, the stories, and the illusions. But more than that, she inherited the willingness to carry on the game with seriousness. And she went further. Where the French had created only documents, she began to build a symbolic court. She organized meetings, wrote letters to heads of state, designed coats of arms, issued stamps, and crafted an entire aesthetic structure around her reign. What was once a European eccentricity became, in Leontina's hands, a form of expression, a space for ritual, identity, and perhaps a kind of living art. It was as if she had understood the true value of that non-existent throne. A value not found on maps, but in the eyes of those willing to believe just a little more than they should. She treated the reign with the care of someone tending a fragile inheritance, one made of paper, of gestures, and of silence. And with that, she rebuilt Orly's throne, not on foreign soil, but within herself. There were no crowds, no soldiers, no governments willing to recognize her majesty. But, for some reason we may never fully understand, the title suited her. And so, the throne inherited from an eccentric Frenchman crossed continents, decades, and cultural barriers, to rest in the hands of a Brazilian woman who embraced it as if it were real. That gesture of continuing something improbable is, in itself, a form of courage. And perhaps also a subtle reminder. Sometimes, what we inherit from the past is not just property or concrete stories, but narrative possibilities. Spaces where we can reinvent reality. Now that you've come to know the throne Anna Leontina inherited, an imaginary throne, but one maintained with seriousness, a question perhaps becomes inevitable. Who was she, after all? Who was this woman capable of wearing an invisible crown with such conviction, to the point of being recognized, even if informally, as queen of a kingdom that didn't exist? The truth is that little is known for certain. Leontina was born in Pernambuco, Brazil, at an uncertain date. Some records suggest the early 20th century, others point to slightly more recent years. She did not come from nobility. On the contrary, everything suggests her origins were humble. But from a young age, she carried an unusual presence. There was something distinct in her, in the way she spoke, walked, occupied space, as if she were always playing a role, but not a false one. It was something deeper, as if she had decided that, even without inheritance, without a formal title, without royal blood, she would be noble in her own way. She was fascinated by ceremonial gestures, by careful language, by coats of arms, titles, formalities. Things that for many sound outdated or even ridiculous, but for her, they formed a sacred language. A language that helped her build herself up, to remain whole, even when life seemed indifferent. Some said she was eccentric. Others, that she was a kind of artist of her own existence. But there were those who, upon meeting Leontina, sensed something beyond that, a kind of ceremonial sadness, as if her personal royalty was also a response to loneliness. She lived alone, had few visitors, but she always kept her royal documents in sight, seals, emblems, medals. She framed letters, used letterhead bearing her royal title, and wrote with great care, as if every word could reinforce the structure of that castle only she could see. Her clothing was discreet, yet meticulous. She preferred long dresses, neutral tones. There was no ostentation, but rather a desire for timeless elegance, as if to say, I may not have a throne, but still, I am a queen. And in a way, she truly was. Leontina understood something many of us forget, that identity can be built through gesture, word, and presence. That the way we choose to present ourselves to the world, even without external validation, is a form of power. She wasn't pretending. She was embodying. And that alone stirred curiosity, and even respect, in those around her. There are accounts of politicians, journalists, and even intellectuals who sought her out of mere curiosity, and left with an ambiguous impression. They didn't know whether they had met a woman detached from reality, or someone profoundly lucid, who had simply rejected the ordinary world to live within her own ceremonial universe. But perhaps the most interesting part is this. Leontina never seemed to seek official recognition. She didn't beg for attention. She didn't organize rallies. She didn't parade her royalty through the streets. Her court was quiet, contained. It was an intimate theater, delicately assembled within her own home and within her own soul. Some people collect stamps, others, old stories. Leontina collected gestures, small rituals that helped her sustain the illusion, or perhaps the internal truth, that her life was greater than what the world had offered her. And maybe that's why she fascinated so many, even while living on the margins. because all of us, to some degree, long to be something more than we are. We all quietly carry an idealized version of ourselves, even if we never have the courage to fully live it. Leontina did. And if today she's remembered as an unusual figure in Brazilian history, it's not just because of her curious title. It's because she dared to live as though the impossible was merely a matter of posture. If there is anything capable of giving weight to an invisible dream, it is the creation of rituals, gestures that transform the ethereal into something concrete. And that is precisely what Ana Leontina did when she created her own court, a symbolic universe that functioned as a kingdom without borders, yet full of meaning. With no lands to rule, no army or palace, she dedicated herself to building a royal apparatus that could sustain her queenship. She invented noble titles, counts, dukes, ministers, appointed people to fictitious positions, and drafted diplomas and decrees, all with the solemnity of a true state. It was a discreet court, to be sure. It gathered few people, often through letters, sometimes in private meetings, where theatricality and affection blended together. No one expected that kingdom to be recognized by the world, but for those involved, it was a refuge, a kind of counterbalance to the emptiness of everyday life. More than that, the titles served as symbols of belonging. Each count or prince in that particular court carried a role within the game that Ana orchestrated with care. And even though it was all symbolic, there was a deep commitment not to diminish the meaning of that parallel world. She also created coats of arms and insignias that were small works of art, drawings full of details, colors, and symbols that evoked the idea of an ancestral nobility lost in time. These coats of arms were not merely visual emblems, they were the materialization of a dreamed-up past, vividly felt. The seals, in turn, made any document issued by the court official. Letters that, even without legal validity, bore the weight of protocol and formality. And upon receiving a letter sealed with royal wax, the recipient was invited to become part of a story that transcended logic. Thus, the court was more than an aesthetic construct. It was a secret language, a silent communion between those who wished to believe in something greater. For Ana, these elements served as a shield against oblivion, a way of telling herself and the world, I exist. I matter. I am queen. And this creation was, in itself, a form of resistance, because it defied the emptiness of a world that so often ignores those who do not fit in. It was not mere empty fantasy, but a careful construction, full of meaning. The court became a place where the real and the imaginary touched, where words held the power to create. This symbolic architecture helped sustain Ana's identity, giving her roots in a soil that, although invisible, was solid for those who chose to walk upon it. And, deep down, this construction is not so different from what we all do in our lives. We create narratives, take on roles, invent little rituals to give meaning to existence. Ana simply took it to the extreme, turning herself into the queen of a kingdom that only existed for those who had the courage to dream. When we think of kingdoms, one of the images that often comes to mind is that of a coin, that small object bearing the face of the sovereign, passed from hand to hand, symbolizing the authority and identity of a nation. And even though the kingdom of Araucanía and Patagonia existed only on paper, Anna Leontina didn't shy away from imagining this tangible dimension of royalty. She created her own coin, the Araucana. The Araucana was not a conventional currency, of course. It had no commercial value, couldn't be used to buy bread or pay for a bus fare. Its meaning was far removed from the pragmatism of everyday transactions. It was a symbol, a gesture steeped in poetry and defiance. A way of saying, here, in this invisible kingdom, there is circulation. There is life. There is power. Creating a coin is, in itself, a deeply political and symbolic act. It defines an economic identity, but also a cultural, artistic, and spiritual one. Every coin is a small universe, a fragment of history forged in metal. And by minting the Araucana, Anna was declaring that her kingdom, though unrecognized, had a soul and a presence. The coins were carefully designed, with elaborate coats of arms, Latin inscriptions, and motifs that evoked both the wild nature of southern South America and the European elegance of ancient monarchies. Pieces for collectors? Perhaps. But for those who participated in that symbolic universe, they were much more than objects. They were witnesses to a royalty that refused to disappear. Moreover, the Araucana circulated among the members of the imaginary court as a form of belonging and affirmation. To receive one was to be invited into a narrative that defied time and space. It was a silent invitation to believe in the impossible. Like the coats of arms and titles, the coin reinforced the symbolic structure that upheld the queen's identity and that of her subjects. It was a visual and tactile language that connected the dream to reality, even if reality refused to acknowledge it. The story of the Araucana, then, is not about economics, but about the human desire to create meaning. About the drive that compels us to build worlds, even when they remain invisible to others. And perhaps, deep down, that is the beauty of this kingdom. It doesn't need official recognition to exist. It lives in the small objects we hold in our hands, in the stories we tell in silence, and in the memories that refuse to fade. If there is something that confers solemnity and officialdom to a kingdom, even an invisible one, it is its symbols. The seals that stamp documents, the coats of arms that adorn flags, and the medals that recognize merit. These small objects carry within them the history, power, and identity of a people. In the case of the kingdom of Araucanía and Patagonia, Anna Leontina understood the value of these symbols with an almost artistic clarity. Her court, though symbolic, possessed a complex iconography that gave form and presence to what, at first glance, seemed merely a fantasy. The royal seals were used to authenticate documents, letters, and proclamations. They had no legal validity, of course, but they conveyed a sense of respect and solemnity. Each stamp, each detail engraved in wax, represented a small piece of this imaginary kingdom, reinforcing its existence through the ritualistic gesture of signing and sealing. The coats of arms were true works of art. Carefully designed and rich in detail, they combined symbols evoking the wild nature and indigenous traditions of the region with elements of European heraldry, creating a bridge between distant and seemingly incompatible worlds. These emblems served not only to decorate documents, but to tell a story. They were visual narratives that spoke of kings and queens, of territories that did not exist on official maps, but lived within the space of collective imagination. The royal medals, in turn, were awarded to people whom the symbolic court considered worthy of recognition, not for military or governmental achievements, but for loyalty to the cause, to the idea of the kingdom, to the dream that sustained the queen and her subjects. These medals did not shine in official displays, but held value in the hearts of those who received them. Anna Leontina knew these objects were more than ornaments. They were bridges between the real and the imaginary, tangible forms that gave body to a kingdom that existed only on the threshold between both. Perhaps the beauty of this gesture lies in the simplicity of its intentions, to use symbols to reaffirm an identity, to create a personal and collective story that, even distant from official reality, was lived with seriousness and care. In the end, these seals, coats of arms and medals are visual metaphors for what we all seek: recognition, belonging, and a place where our existence matters. While the official world ignored the existence of the queen and her kingdom, these symbols were her silent voice, a way of saying, "I am real, even if you do not see me." And thus, the kingdom of Araucanía and Patagonia continued to take shape, not on maps or treaties, but in the hands of those who held its symbols with reverence. In the silent universe of the kingdom of Araucanía and Patagonia, where the realm did not exist on maps but lived through words and gestures, there was one particularly curious ritual: the sending of official letters to presidents, rulers, and world leaders. These correspondences, always signed Her Majesty Leontina I, revealed Anna Leontina's courage and belief in her own royalty, a delicate blend of theatricality, persistence, and longing for recognition. Let us imagine the scene for a moment: a Brazilian woman in her home, carefully preparing a letter on royal letterhead, her coat of arms printed at the top, her handwriting neat and deliberate, and at the end, the regal signature. She writes to heads of state, making claims, issuing notices, even extending formal invitations. Letters that, more often than not, likely never received a reply. But the gesture matters far more than the response. Sending those letters was a way to affirm the existence of that invisible kingdom in the eyes of the official world, a way of making real what seemed impossible. It was her way of saying, through words and symbols, that Her Majesty was not alone in her dream, that she sought connection beyond the boundaries of imagination. For Anna, each letter was an act of resistance and hope. Resistance against being forgotten, against invisibility. Hope that, even if no one recognized her crown, she could at least be heard. These correspondences bring forth a deeper theme: the power of the written word as a tool of creation and affirmation. Before social media, before videos and instant images, the letter was the solemn channel through which reputation was built and authority established. And even if the recipients were distant leaders, unaware of that invented monarchy's existence, to Leontina, it was real. She poured time, care, and belief into every line she wrote, weaving invisible bridges between her kingdom and the world. In a way, those letters represent a universal human longing to be recognized, to have one's voice heard by those who hold power. They go beyond mere formality, touching on something symbolic and emotional. Moreover, the letters circulated within her small symbolic court, where they were read, discussed, and kept as precious relics. They were tangible proof that the Queen existed, even if only on paper, and in the hearts of her own. Anna's persistence in maintaining this contact with the official world invites us to reflect on the meaning of power and legitimacy. After all, what truly makes someone a king or queen? External recognition, or the inner strength of belief and identity? And if we think more deeply, perhaps all of us at some point write invisible letters, unsent messages, unshared dreams, secret wishes that never reach their recipient, but that, in the silence, define who we are. In the midst of this invisible and silent kingdom, a question arises. Who would be the subjects of a queen without territory? After all, how can there be real influence when there is no country, no government, no official forces? The answer lies in the hearts and minds of those who chose, of their own free will, to be part of this story. Those who, in some way, wanted to believe. They were not naive people, nor fanatical followers. They were individuals seeking something beyond the tangible. People who, deep down, felt the need to belong to something greater, to participate in a collective dream that challenged routine and the pragmatism of daily life. For these voluntary subjects, Anna Leontina's kingdom was a symbolic space where they could find meaning, identity, and even a certain existential comfort. A refuge where the absurd gained meaning and the impossible, relevance. They received titles, insignias, and coins, symbols that connected them to a shared cause. They participated in discreet gatherings, ceremonies, and investitures that, though small in scale, had a deep impact on those who took part. This influence, far from being political or material, was essentially emotional and symbolic. It was an invisible network of trust and hope, sustained by the power of narrative and belief. By adhering to the invisible kingdom, these voluntary subjects experienced a sense of community that was often missing from their real lives. They became part of something that went beyond the ordinary, something that gave them voice and place. It is fascinating to consider how faith, even in something that does not exist in concrete form, can create deep and lasting bonds. After all, every religion, ideology, or social movement is born from the same seed, the belief in something that transcends the immediate. In the case of Anna Leontina's court, this faith manifested not in temples, but in seals, coats of arms, coins, and letters. It was a secular religiosity, built from human gestures and full of nuance. Behind the figure of the queen and her voluntary subjects lies a shared humanity, the desire for meaning, recognition, and belonging. This real influence, though invisible to the eyes of the official world, was as true as any kingdom recognized by treaties or alliances. It reminds us that the power of royalty and of belonging does not reside solely in territory, but in the heart of those who choose to believe. In the invisible kingdom ruled by Anna Leontina, life was not confined to static titles and symbols. There were also moments of gathering, celebration, and ritual. Events that, though unofficial, held the quiet power of reaffirming the identity of that singular court, a true court of shadows and dreams. These gatherings, often discreet, brought together members of the symbolic court, counts, dukes, ministers, and voluntary subjects, in occasions that blended theatricality, affection, and a sense of belonging. In modest settings, perhaps a simple room lit by candles, gestures of nobility were carried out with delicacy and reverence. During noble investitures, for instance, Anna would grant titles to those she deemed worthy, not by bloodline, but by their commitment to the imaginary kingdom and its ideals. There was no excessive pomp, but rather a deep respect for the symbolism and the meaning of the moment. A near-sacred rite that reinforced invisible bonds and gave purpose to their shared existence. These ceremonies were more than mere formalities. They were acts of resistance against oblivion, a way to declare that, even without territory, without official recognition, the court existed, and it existed with dignity. Participants, upon receiving their titles, felt part of something greater than themselves. It was an experience of belonging that transcended social status, touching the emotional and spiritual realms. Beyond the investitures, there were also gatherings to discuss the kingdom's future, to exchange letters, to plan the issuance of new coins or the creation of seals. These moments served as small oases of connection among those who shared an improbable dream. And even though they had no concrete political influence, these events fostered a network of solidarity and friendship that crossed distances and differences. It was a silent communion among those who recognized themselves in the same royal fantasy. The beauty of this process lies in how Anna Leontina transformed the act of ruling, something usually associated with power and control, into a gesture of collective creation and human connection. She showed that terrain can also be an act of imagination and emotional bonding, and that, sometimes, it is precisely this invisible dimension that holds the most power. Sometimes, the silence of an invented dream is broken by the unexpected sound of public attention. That's what happened when the press, both in Brazil and in Europe, discovered the story of Anna Leontina, the woman who called herself queen of a kingdom that no one recognized. The episode made its way into curious headlines, some tinged with astonishment, others laced with irony or even mockery. After all, the idea of a queen of Brazil with no throne, no territory, yet filled with royal documents, symbolic coins, and an invisible court, seemed like something out of an absurd chronicle. Newspapers published detailed reports, some expressing sympathy, others questioning the protagonist's sanity or sincerity. There was something in the story that fascinated as much as it invited subtle smirks, a mix of mystery, eccentricity, and resistance. But for Anna Leontina, the attention from the press didn't necessarily mean true recognition. At most, it was a fleeting curiosity, a flash of interest that quickly faded, returning her to her silent kingdom. On the other hand, this exposure placed her image and imaginary kingdom under the spotlight, creating a small community of followers, admirers, and even scholars intrigued by the phenomenon. These journalistic accounts, with their headlines and descriptions, helped the story of the invisible queen cross generations. What began as a regional curiosity became a subject that fueled the popular imagination. And even if some parts of the press treated the case with irony, the narrative they told remained alive, a testimony to how reality can be stranger and subtler than any fiction. In the end, what fascinates most about this story is its duality. A queen who both exists and doesn't, who is celebrated and overlooked, who is legend and person at the same time. The press captured this paradox, and in doing so, helped preserve the invisible kingdom within the pages of collective memory. For us, listening to this story today, the media's attention serves as a reminder. Even the faintest illusions can become part of history when told with truth and courage. In the discreet and singular setting of the kingdom of Araucanía and Patagonia, it didn't take long for Anna Leontina to draw attention, not only from the press, but also from certain politicians and intellectuals who, with a mix of curiosity and skepticism, decided to take a closer look at this queen without a kingdom. These individuals, often removed from the public spotlight, did not see Leontina merely as an eccentric or a folkloric character. Some viewed her as a kind of social and psychological phenomenon, a personification of the human search for identity, belonging, and meaning. Curious politicians, navigating the corridors of power, found in her a story that challenged conventional codes. To them, the existence of an invisible kingdom represented an unexpected mirror of the complexities of human relationships and the symbolic construction of power. Intellectuals, in turn, approached her with a gaze that blended analysis and empathy. Philosophers, anthropologists, writers, and artists saw in Anna a source of inspiration, a figure who, even living on the margins of official reality, exercised a unique form of authority. An authority not based on armies or territories, but on narrative, symbolism, and presence. There are reports of private meetings, letter exchanges, and quiet debates about the meaning of that fanciful reign. For these observers, the queen represented more than a curiosity. She was a case study in the power of the stories we tell ourselves and others. And, in a way, Anna became a meeting point between distinct worlds, the political, the artistic, and the intimate. She inspired discussions about legitimacy and fantasy, about the social construction of identity, and about the thin line between dream and madness. But she also stirred admiration for the courage to live such a unique role, for the ability to create an entire court in the absence of official recognition, for the persistence in keeping alive a dream that seemed destined to be forgotten. These relationships with politicians and intellectuals helped lend symbolic weight to the invisible kingdom, extending its existence beyond the borders of individual imagination. Ultimately, this closeness confirms that, for those who observe carefully, even illusions can reveal profound truths, and that, sometimes, the most meaningful reality lies precisely where few dare to look. In the delicate space where dreams and reality intertwine, there exists a thin and almost invisible line, the line that separates madness from idealism. And it is on this boundary, often confused and full of shadows, that the story of Anna Leontina, the queen of a kingdom that never existed, is found. To some, her quest for a symbolic throne and the creation of an imaginary court might seem like the product of delirium or escapism. Others, however, see in her the indomitable spirit of the idealist, the one who refuses the imposed reality and chooses to build a world of their own, even if it means walking alone. It is important to remember that human history is full of characters who challenged the limits of what is considered normal. Inventors, artists, visionaries. Many of them were seen as eccentrics or even madmen in their time. Yet, it was precisely these restless minds that paved the way for new ways of thinking and living. Anna Leontina, by assuming a royal title without a kingdom, became one of those liminal figures. Her courage to live a fantasy with extreme seriousness invites us to question, where does madness end and idealism begin? Or are both sides of the same coin? The construction of her court, the letters sent to heads of state, the issuing of coins and medals, All of this could be read as an act of denial of reality, an escape. But it can also be seen as an act of creation, a poetic gesture of resistance against oblivion and invisibility. This ambiguity is part of the fascination that Anna's story holds for us. It makes us reflect on the power of imagination to shape our experience of the world, on how, sometimes, we need to believe in something that transcends the tangible to give meaning to our existence. And on this border between madness and idealism, Anna found her kingdom. A kingdom without walls, but with invisible barriers made of dreams and perseverance. She lived between these two extremes, challenging norms, refusing to accept the limits society imposed. Amid all the symbolic pomp, the coins, the titles, and the letters sent to distant leaders, there is another reality, quieter and more intimate, that was also part of Anna Leontina's life, the deep loneliness of ruling a kingdom that does not exist. Being queen of an invisible kingdom may seem, to some, like a charming fantasy. But behind the ceremonies and investitures, there was a void hard to ignore. The lack of official recognition, the silence of the streets and governments, the absence of a real people to govern, all of this weighed like a constant shadow. This loneliness was not only geographical or social. It was an existential loneliness. The feeling of occupying a role that no one, or almost no one, fully shared. Of carrying a symbolic burden without concrete support. Even with the careful creation of her court, made of symbols and gestures, Anna lived a life on the margins of the real world, between dream and reality. A queen whose kingdom dissolved with the breeze, whose borders were made of wishes and imagination. One can imagine the moments when she sat alone, perhaps with her royal documents spread around her, contemplating the silence surrounding her. The silence of someone who knows Her Majesty is not recognized, and whose throne is a delicate construction, held up by invisible threads. And yet, Anna chose to continue. She persisted in keeping her symbolic kingdom alive, even knowing her legacy might be seen as eccentricity or delusion. This loneliness, paradoxically, reveals the strength of her determination and the depth of her humanity. Because being a queen, even of a kingdom that exists only in imagination, is also facing the loneliness of power and the constant doubt about one's own identity. It is a reminder that behind great stories, there is always a personal and intimate dimension, made of emotions, doubts, and desires. And that often, the most daring dreams carry with them the silent burden of isolation. Life, with its inevitable fragility, came to Anna Leontina as it comes to all of us. Silent, discreet, yet irrevocable. Her mortal body, which bore the weight of an invisible crown for so long, one day ceased to beat. The queen of a kingdom that never existed stopped existing in flesh and bone. But, curiously, it was precisely this passage, the end of life, that gave rise to a new chapter, the myth. When Anna passed away, many might have expected her story to fade away, her dream to dissolve into the silence of oblivion. But the opposite happened. Death was not a full stop, but a comma that suspended her narrative in the air, expanding the mystery and fascination around her. The myth of the invisible queen began to gain strength. Stories started being told not only about the woman who dreamed of a kingdom, but about the idea she embodied, the boldness to believe in the impossible, the courage to build a world of her own, even when the real world denied it. The coins, the titles, the letters, the seals, all of these became reliquaries of a memory that refused to die. The few followers and admirers began to guard the symbols of that symbolic court with even more care, turning them into treasures of a story that transcends time. The figure of Anna Leontina transformed into legend. An ambiguous character who walks between reality and fantasy, inviting each new listener to reflect on the boundaries between what is and what could be. And so, what began as a solitary act of imagination became a collective legacy, a narrative that crosses generations and borders. The end of the Queen's physical life did not erase her invisible reign. On the contrary, it fueled the flame of the myth, making her story continue to be told, studied, and dreamed. This phenomenon is not exclusive to her. Great figures in history and human culture have seen their lives turn into myths, capable of inspiring and moving hearts long after their time in the physical world. And perhaps that is true eternity, not to live forever in body, but to remain alive in memory, imagination, and in people's hearts. Anna Leontina, the queen who never existed, is the living proof of this paradoxical immortality, as real as the stories we tell to give meaning to life. Even after the death of Anna Leontina, the queen who never ruled over real lands, the throne of the kingdom of Araucanía and Patagonia did not remain empty. Or rather, it was empty in a physical sense, because in the realm of the imagination, the symbolic legacy of this invisible monarchy continued alive, pulsating, defying logic and the lack of recognition. The succession of the non-existent throne is perhaps one of the most curious and paradoxical stories surrounding this kingdom. Without a defined territory, without a legitimate political structure, and without official recognition, the title of sovereign became a symbol, an act of personal and collective affirmation that transcends the tangible world. Shortly after Anna Leontina's life ended, the so-called claimants appeared, individuals who, for their own reasons, proclaimed themselves heirs to the throne. Some motivated by admiration, others by a search for meaning, and still others by the simple desire to belong to something that transcends everyday life. These heirs of the invisible throne keep alive the flame of a kingdom that, although non-existent on the map, is very real in the stories and beliefs that accompany this unique lineage. Curiously, the succession does not follow the traditional rules of conventional monarchies, based on bloodline or state recognition. Here, the throne is more of an idea than a formal position, a title passed on as a symbol of resistance, imagination, and belonging. By assuming this reign, the claimants perpetuate a game that challenges the boundaries between the real and the imaginary, the official and the private. They keep the symbolic court alive, update coins, issue new letters, create ceremonies, and thus prolong the story started by Anna. This phenomenon is fascinating because it reveals the power of narrative to survive time and the absence of external recognition. The succession of the invisible throne is a delicate dance between continuity and reinvention, between past and present. For many, this symbolic lineage is an invitation to reflect on what it truly means to govern and to belong. If traditional royalty is made of territory and concrete power, this invisible succession is made of dreams, stories, and human bonds. And perhaps, in this borderless kingdom, lies an important lesson. That power, in its deepest sense, is the ability to create meaning and give voice to those who wish to be heard. Somewhere inside each of us, there is an almost magical attraction to crowns, even those that glow in the dark, those that have no gold or jewels, those that no one can really touch or rule. But why does this happen? Why do we believe, even if only for moments, in invisible crowns, in kings and queens who exist only in the shadows of imagination? Perhaps the answer lies in human nature, which has always sought symbols to give meaning to life. A crown, after all, is not just a physical object. It is a sign of power, authority, belonging, and identity. It represents the idea that there is something greater guiding us, protecting us, defining us. In the case of Queen Anna Leontina and her borderless kingdom, this belief becomes an invitation to reflect on the power of symbols. Even without official recognition, symbols, the crowns, the coins, the titles, shine because they carry within themselves the ability to connect people, to build stories, and to nurture dreams. The invisible crown that Anna wore, therefore, was not just a fantasy. It was a refuge, a way to affirm her existence and her voice in a world that often ignores those who dare to be different. And it is in this glow in the dark that many of us find a space to exist, a place where the rules of the real world can be rewritten, where imagination has voice and place. Moreover, believing in these crowns helps us deal with life's complexity. It gives us a feeling of control, importance, belonging. It reminds us that, despite being fragile and small before the universe, we can create our own kingdoms, even if invisible to others. This silent faith in crowns that shine in the shadows is, therefore, an expression of our need for meaning and connection, a gesture of resistance against emptiness and anonymity. And perhaps that is the greatest magic of all, not the crown's own shine, but the light it ignites within us, a light that resists the darkness of doubt and oblivion. If we think about it, we all carry an invisible kingdom within us, a secret and private space where we are kings and queens of our own dreams, doubts, and hopes. This kingdom does not appear on maps, is not recognized by treaties or governments, but still, it is as real as the world we see and touch. Inside it, we keep our most intimate memories, the desires we sometimes don't even dare to confess, the pains we hide from the world. It is a territory made of feelings, choices, and identity, a place where our essence finds shelter and recognition. Just like Anna Leontina created her symbolic court, we also build invisible castles in our minds and hearts. We raise walls to protect ourselves, create thrones to affirm our importance, hoist flags to mark who we are. This inner kingdom can be a refuge against loneliness, a source of strength in moments of uncertainty, or simply a space to be ourselves, without masks or judgments. And although it is invisible to others, it is in our private kingdom that many decisions are made, where our life gains direction and meaning. But there is also an invitation in this thought, to recognize that, despite all the fantasy and mystery, our inner kingdom deserves care and attention, that we must nurture our dreams and accept our imperfections, because they are part of who we are. The story of Anna Leontina, with her kingdom that never existed in the physical world, reminds us of this in a powerful way, that it is possible to find dignity and meaning even in realities that exist only inside us. And perhaps this is the greatest truth of human existence: the ability to create worlds, to build identities, and to seek meaning, even when everything around seems to fall apart. So I invite you to close your eyes now. Take a deep breath and think about your own invisible kingdom. What are its borders? Who are its subjects? What stories does it hold? What dreams do you nurture there? Allow yourself to feel this presence, silent yet powerful, that lives inside you. Because, in the silence of this inner kingdom, we can find the peace and courage to face whatever comes. And so we come to the end of this journey through the story of a queen who never existed. A story that invites us to look beyond the visible, to the invisible realms quietly dwelling within each of us. Throughout this time, we have been guided through a world where illusion took shape, where crowns shone even in the darkness, where the search for meaning and identity created a throne made of dreams and perseverance. This story is not just about Anna Leontina, the queen of the kingdom of Araucanía and Patagonia, but about what it means to dream, to resist, and to build meaning, even when the world seems not to recognize it. And that is why here, on the Verdade Sonolenta channel, we like to travel through these stories that float between the real and the imaginary, because they help us understand the complexity of the human condition, the beauty of contradictions, and the strength found in continuing to believe. If this silent journey touched your heart or awakened some reflection, I would be very happy if you left your comment down below. I want to know what you thought of this queen without a kingdom, of these dreams we create to give life meaning. Also, if you liked it, please leave your like, not as an empty request, but as a simple gesture that helps me keep bringing stories like this, which can help calm the mind and soul of those who listen. And, of course, if you're not yet part of our community, subscribe to the channel. Here, we don't offer crowns or castles, but a peaceful space to explore the strange, the mysterious, what makes us think and feel. Being subscribed is a kind way of saying you want to continue down this road, discovering truths that often hide between dream and reality. Now, before finishing, I want to invite you to close your eyes. Take a deep breath. Let the weight of the day slowly dissolve. Allow this real absurdity, the story of this queen who never existed, but who lives in the shadows of imagination, to gently fade into the mist of your dreams. May this mist carry you to a place of calm and rest, where crowns shine just for you. Good night.